a defining moment. Trinidad and Tobago at a crossroads as oil runs out. Welcome to Trinidad and Tobago, a nation at a pivotal moment. In 1930, Trinidad and Tobago produced more than 40% of the British Empire's oil. By the 1970s, the newly independent republic was producing 278,000 barrels of crude oil a day. For a country of just 1 million people, after the collapse of its sugar and cocoa industries, oil proved to be transformative. Once the powerhouse of the British Empire's oil production, today it faces a stark reality. Today, with a population of 1.5 million and oil production down to less than 54,000 barrels a day, Trinidad and Tobago is at a crossroads. The country's only petroleum refinery closed in 2018 due to mismanagement and declining production by the state-owned Trin company. The country must evolve beyond fossil fuels to ensure a thriving economy. Trinidad and Tobago's only oil refinery in 2015. The state-owned plant was closed in 2018, when local production fell so low that oil had to be imported to supply it. With crude oil production declining since the 2000s, while gas increased, then sharply decreased, the country faces a standoff. Environmentalists are calling for a greener economy, while the new government, like its predecessors, pushes for more deep-water exploration. Trinidad and Tobago's history is rich with oil wealth. However, dependency has led to economic challenges. We have fallen victim to Dutch disease, a dependence on one single sector, which has defined who we are from an economic and social perspective, says Indira Sajawan, an economist and director of the Caribbean Center for Competitiveness. Non-energy economic diversification is imperative as the way forward for Trinidad and Tobago. We are living a defining moment. The new government's focus on deep-water drilling highlights the tension between growth and sustainability. To thrive, the nation needs to diversify. To escape the low-growth trap, experts such as Sajawan have long argued that Trinidad and Tobago should diversify its economy, a challenge for a commodity-exporting country reliant on oil and gas. Unlike other oil-dependent states, such as Norway, the UAE, and Qatar, Trinidad and Tobago has failed to maximize the benefits of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which was established in 2007 to invest surplus revenues as a means of consolidating the legacy of oil wealth. Now, the country faces the prospect of chronic low growth, according to an OECD report published in December. Last year, GDP grew by an estimated 1.7%, up from 1.4% in 2023. The government also faces rising unemployment rates and fiscal pressures, with public debt reaching 64.5% of GDP in 2024, higher than the average of 51.9% in Central America and the Caribbean, according to the OECD. The newly introduced green hydrogen strategy aims for 4 million tons of green hydrogen by 2065. Investing in renewable energy is crucial for environmental preservation and economic stability. Moreover, rising unemployment and public debt pressure the economy. A multidimensional approach is needed to stimulate growth. Expanding into sectors like tourism, agriculture, and technology can reshape the landscape. Introduced in 2022, the country's green hydrogen strategy is a step in that direction, aiming to overhaul the energy sector by shifting from gray to green hydrogen, the former produced from gas, which creates CO2 emissions, the latter splitting water using renewable energy, using existing petrochemical infrastructure, and producing 4 million tons of green hydrogen annually by 2065. The country has also announced plans to install $57 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2065, with the aim of achieving 30% renewable electricity generation. Yet all of that remains just a very early stage plans, according to Sajawan. On 13 August, the government of the Prime Minister, Kamla Persad Bisesar, signaled its intent to press on with fossil fuels, by signing a deal with ExxonMobil to explore a vast ultra-deep water block off the country's east coast, covering more than 7,000 kilometers in waters, more than 1.2 miles, 2 kilometers deep. If reserves are found, the investment could reach up to 21.7 billion, according to the Energy Minister, Rudal Munilal. Deepwater drilling, seeking new discoveries in unexplored Atlantic waters like the oil rush in nearby Guyana and Suriname. There is no real strong stakeholder movement here that says, "Stop exploring for oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago," says Dax Driver, chief executive of the Energy Chamber, the industry's lobby group. From the first oil well drilled in the 19th century to the discovery of offshore gas fields in the 1990s, fossil fuels have been Trinidad and Tobago's economic lifeblood, bringing infrastructure and wealth far beyond Caribbean neighbors. Now, experts question how close Trinidad and Tobago is to a crunch point. A 2019 report by a U.S. consultancy estimated there were 10 years of gas reserves left. Last year, Stuart Young, then Energy Minister, said reserves had risen to 11 years, or potentially 20 with efficient extraction. However, the oil cartel OPEC's data indicates that crude oil output is in freefall, and gas production is also declining. The oil money transformed lives for the better in many ways. Free university education, extensive public sector employment, subsidized electricity, gas and water that were among the cheapest utilities in the world, and petrol prices at a third of UK levels. A thriving middle class and a wealthy elite emerged. Highways, hospitals, and airports were built. But wealth also fueled corruption, inequality, and violent crime. The country remains heavily dependent on oil, while drilling and spills threaten the fragile ecosystems. Don't just take our word for it. Experts warn of the dangers of continued fossil fuel reliance. Environmental degradation and climate change pose significant threats to the islands. The urgency to pivot towards sustainable practices is now. Communities affected by environmental fallout need support and empowerment. Still, investing heavily in oil and gas exploration has once again become a priority after April's elections in Trinidad and Tobago restored the United National Congress, UNC party, to government under Persad Bissessar. Munilal says the government supports decarbonization initiatives, such as the Brecon Castle Solar Farm, the largest in the region, which could supply 10% of the nation's electricity. However, fossil fuels remain the priority. We need to be finding more natural gas, the Energy Minister says. Natural gas production declined by 34% from 2015 to 2024, and oil declined by 35% over the same period, he says. At the end of 2022, proven gas reserves stood at 57 ton cubic feet, 1.14 billion tons. That represents significant potential for future discoveries, particularly in deep-water acreage. Deep-water exploration is important to us. Munilal adds that Trinidad and Tobago hopes to also export its energy expertise. Guyana, Suriname, and Grenada are at different hydrocarbon development stages. We have great human resource expertise and infrastructure. We also have plants that need raw material, he says. We see a win-win scenario. Going against this enthusiasm for oil and gas, environmentalists and economists warn that such reliance on fossil fuels exposes Trinidad and Tobago to ecological harm, price shocks, and socio-economic collapse in a region vulnerable to extreme weather events. The climate crisis has cost Caribbean countries an average of 2.13% of regional GDP annually from 1980 to 2020, according to the OECD. Meanwhile, Trinidad's per capita emissions rank 8th highest globally at 22.8 tons, which is more than 5 times the rate of the UK. Will you stop exploring yours? Latin America forges ahead on new oil frontier. Aidan Farrell of the University of the West Indies says the Caribbean has warmed by about 1°C, 1.8 F, since 1960, with a similar rise expected by 2050. There is a lot of attention on how we will be able to produce enough food. The government is preparing for more frequent tropical storms, sea level rise, and coastal erosion, where most economic activity, including oil and gas, is located, he says. Environmentalists argue that the ecological toll is already high. Oil spills, gas flaring, and industrial waste have degraded ecosystems, impacted fisheries, and exposed coastal communities to real harm, says Dizan Billy, Regional Director of Climate Tracker Caribbean. We're faced with a troubling paradox. A small island bearing the brunt of climate impacts while contributing significantly to the problem. The country has faced several environmental disasters in recent years. In 2024, a capsized barge triggered a national emergency, with oil spreading hundreds of miles to the island of Bonaire, contaminating beaches, mangroves, and coral. We need policies empowering workers to transition with dignity into new industries. Billy stresses the urgent need to pivot away from fossil fuels. The urgency isn't just environmental, it's economic, social, and generational, she says. Fossil fuel wealth hasn't trickled down equally. Frontline communities face underinvestment while absorbing environmental fallout. That's not just economic, it's a climate justice issue. For campaigners such as Billy, a continued focus on fossil fuels is short-sighted. Our dependence leaves us vulnerable to global price shocks, she says. The problem is that diversification remains at an early stage. Tourism is marginal outside Carnival Week in spring, and agriculture needs a dramatic boost to fill the oil void. Still, Sajuan sees the country as a potential exporter of food globally. Michael J. Cooper, an expert in energy finance and a former analyst at the Energy Ministry, sees banking and insurance expanding with a development strategy over the next decade. He lists manufacturing, tourism, film, entertainment, shipping, shipbuilding, and ship repair, as well as food production as viable alternatives. Like dropping a bomb. Why is clean energy leader Uruguay ramping up the search for oil? As we look to the future, Trinidad and Tobago stands at a crossroads. The choice between fossil fuel dependency and a diversified economy rests with the leaders and communities. Join us in supporting a shift toward a greener, more sustainable Trinidad and Tobago. Together, we can create a brighter future for generations to come.